She said stop and he didn't listen. Now he's blaming her for forgetting a word and she believes him. She told him to stop. She said it out loud. She pushed him away with her hands. And he kept going. That is where this story begins, and I need you to sit with that for a second before we go any further, because the details that follow are going to make your head spin. So let's back up. This is a 23-year-old woman who has been with her 29-year-old boyfriend for a few months. He wanted to try something in the bedroom that she was not initially comfortable with. She was hesitant, she was uncertain, but eventually she agreed. And because he knew she was not fully on board, he told her they would have a safe word. That was the safety net he put in place. That was his promise to her. If you feel uncomfortable, if you feel pain, just say the word and I will stop. No questions asked. That is how this was supposed to work. Now here is where things get complicated, and I want you to listen carefully because this matters. When it started, she did not like it. She felt uncomfortable almost immediately. But she stayed quiet. She did not say the safe word. And if you are wondering why, the answer is sitting right there in her own words. She stayed quiet because he really wanted to do this. She was already putting her own discomfort aside for his benefit before things even got difficult. She was already prioritizing his experience over her own feelings before the situation turned painful. Think about what that means for a moment. Even before the pain arrived, even before anything went wrong in the most serious sense, she had already made a quiet decision inside herself that his enjoyment mattered more than her comfort. That is not a small thing. That is a pattern of thinking that does not appear out of nowhere. It takes root slowly, in the small moments, in the times when someone learns that keeping the peace matters more than speaking up. That is the foundation this whole story is built on. Then the pain came. And when it did, she did not reach for the safe word. She said stop. Plain and simple. The most basic, universally understood word in the English language for when you want something to end. She said stop. She said it more than once. She tried to physically push him away. She was communicating as clearly as any human being can communicate without using a specific pre-agreed term. Her hands were on him, pushing. Her voice was in the room, saying the word. There was nothing ambiguous about what she wanted. There was nothing that required interpretation or guesswork. She was telling him, with her body and her words at the same time, that she needed it to stop. And he kept going. He looked at everything she was doing and he decided, in real time, to continue anyway. That is the moment I need you to hold in your mind as we keep going. Not a miscommunication. Not a misread signal. A decision. He only stopped when she started crying. And even then, not immediately. Let that land. She was in pain, she was crying, she had been saying stop and pushing him away, and he did not stop right away. He stopped eventually. After she had already reached a point of visible emotional breakdown. Imagine what those moments felt like for her. She had already said stop. She had already tried to push him away with her hands. And now she was crying, which is about as clear a signal of distress as the human body produces, and still there was a delay. Still there was a gap between her breaking down and him choosing to stop. That is the timeline. That is what actually happened in that room. And it matters that we name it exactly that way, because the story she tells about herself afterward does not name it that way at all. His explanation afterward was that he thought she was playing along. That he believed she was acting. That he assumed the tears and the words and the physical resistance were all part of some performance. And I want to be really careful here because I want to make sure I say this clearly. When someone is crying and saying stop and pushing you away, the correct response in any situation, with any prior agreement, is to stop. Immediately. Not to continue because you have decided in your own head that they must be pretending. The burden of knowing whether someone is genuinely distressed does not belong to the person in distress. It belongs to the person who has the power to stop. He had that power. He chose not to use it until it became impossible to look away from what was happening right in front of him. Then came the part that I think is the most damaging thing in this entire story. He blamed her. He told her it was her fault for forgetting the safe word. And here is the truly heartbreaking part. She believed him. She sat down and wrote about this experience, and her conclusion was that he was right and she was at fault. She used the phrase technically he did not do anything wrong. And she feels terrible about not answering his phone calls because he is still her boyfriend. I want to pause here and just say, out loud, that reading those words is one of the most difficult things about this story. She is 23 years old. She is one day out from something that left her in pain and in tears. She is still crying. And she is spending her emotional energy feeling guilty about not picking up his calls. Picture her sitting somewhere in her home, phone buzzing, his name on the screen, and instead of being held or comforted or given space to process, she is managing her guilt about not answering. She is not thinking about what happened to her. She is thinking about whether she is being fair to him. That is what the blame did. That is what being told it was your fault does to a person. It redirects all of the hurt inward instead of allowing them to look at the situation clearly. It convinces someone who was just hurt to spend their remaining energy worrying about the feelings of the person who hurt them. It is one of the quietest and most effective ways that accountability disappears. Let us talk about the safe word itself, because this is where the boyfriend's argument completely falls apart. The entire point of a safe word is to create a clear and unambiguous signal that a person can use when normal communication becomes difficult. It exists precisely for situations where someone might panic, freeze up, feel overwhelmed, or in this case forget a word under stress. Forgetting a safe word is not a moral failure. It is a human response to being in a situation that felt painful and frightening. When your body is hurting and your mind is scrambling to make sense of what is happening, the specific word you agreed on in a calm, ordinary moment can simply vanish. That is not a character flaw. That is what stress does to memory. And critically, the safe word was never meant to be the only way she could communicate distress. She communicated distress. She did everything a person can do to signal that something needs to stop. The argument that she failed to use the exact agreed-upon term while simultaneously crying and physically resisting is not a legal defense. It is not even a reasonable explanation. It is a deflection. It is a way of moving the conversation away from his choices and onto hers. It takes something she did, forgetting a word under duress, and makes it the subject of the story, so that what he did, continuing when she said stop, gets treated as a footnote. That switch, from his behavior to her behavior, is not accidental. It is the whole mechanism by which she ended up writing about guilt instead of harm. And his choices are worth examining very closely. He chose to continue when she said stop. He chose to continue when she pushed him away. He chose to continue when she said she had forgotten the word. He chose to continue even when she was crying, and he only stopped at some point after the crying began, not immediately upon seeing her distress. Every single one of those was a decision. A conscious moment where he registered what was in front of him and chose to keep going. And then, when it was over, he chose to tell her that all of it was her fault. That sequence of choices, from beginning to end, belongs entirely to him. Here is what I think this young woman needs to hear, and I mean this with every ounce of sincerity I have. You did not fail because you forgot a word. You communicated clearly and repeatedly and you were not listened to. The responsibility for what happened in that room does not rest with you. She keeps saying she knows it was her fault. She keeps saying he technically did not do anything wrong. And it is clear she is trying to make sense of something that feels deeply wrong but that she has been told to frame as her own mistake. That internal conflict, the gap between what her instincts are telling her and the story she has been handed, is not a small thing to carry. It sits in the chest like something unresolved. It keeps her awake. It makes ordinary moments feel heavy and strange. That internal conflict is what is keeping her up at night. That is why she is still crying a day later. Because her own instincts are telling her something that the story she has been handed is not allowing her to believe. Her body knows what happened. Her emotions know what happened. The only thing standing between her and that knowledge is the voice of the person who told her to look elsewhere. The fact that she has not picked up the phone is not something to feel guilty about. Taking space after something painful is not a betrayal. Needing time to process is not cruelty. She owes herself that space, and she does not owe him an immediate conversation just because he is calling. The phone calls are not a sign of love or concern. They are pressure. And she does not have to answer pressure just because it comes wrapped in a familiar name on a screen. Now let me give my honest closing thoughts on this situation, and I am not going to soften them. This boyfriend constructed a narrative that placed all responsibility on her the moment something went wrong. He did not lead with care or concern for how she was feeling. He did not ask if she was okay before explaining his side. He went straight to defending himself and then handed her the blame. And she accepted it because she is in a relationship with him and she trusted him and she was already in a vulnerable state after something that hurt her. That is not a coincidence. Vulnerable people accept blame more easily. And someone who moves immediately to self-defense rather than care, in the aftermath of their partner's pain, is telling you something important about how they understand their own role in a relationship. That pattern, the one where your feelings get acknowledged briefly before the conversation pivots to why it was actually your fault, is one worth paying close attention to. Because how a person responds when you are hurt tells you more about them than almost anything else. And what this response told her, whether she can see it yet or not, is that his priority in that moment was not her well-being. It was making sure he was not the one who did something wrong. She deserves someone whose first instinct when she is crying is to stop, check in, and make sure she is okay. Not someone whose first instinct is to finish and then explain why her tears were not a good enough reason to stop sooner. This is not a safe word problem. This is a respect problem. And no relationship, no matter how much love is in it, is sustainable when one person's pain gets turned into the other person's excuse. Her friend moved in for a few days 3 weeks ago and now he can't even sit on his own couch. You get home after a brutal day at work. All you want is your couch, your game, your cats, and maybe an hour of peace. Instead you walk into your own living room and someone who does not pay rent asks you to put on headphones because you are being too loud. In your own home. That you pay 70% of. Let that land before we go any further, because it matters. Let us start from the beginning, because this situation escalated in a way that I think a lot of people are going to recognize immediately. This is a 32-year-old man who has been living with his girlfriend Sarah for 2 years. By all accounts things were solid, genuinely good even, the kind of relationship where you have settled into something comfortable and real. Then about 3 weeks ago, Sarah's best friend Chloe went through a bad breakup and needed somewhere to land. Not a quiet, mutual decision kind of breakup. A painful, destabilizing one that left her with nowhere obvious to go and no emotional footing to stand on. Sarah asked if Chloe could stay on the couch for a few days. He said yes. He said yes because he wanted to be supportive, because his girlfriend asked him to, because a few days is a reasonable thing to agree to when someone you care about is hurting. He said yes with a full and open heart, and he probably felt good about it in that moment. 3 days became 3 weeks. And there is no end in sight. No conversation about a plan. No mention of a next step. Just quiet, incremental settling, the kind that happens when nobody draws a line early enough and suddenly drawing one feels cruel. Now let us talk about what 3 weeks actually looks like in this apartment, because it is not just a matter of having an extra person around. The energy of a shared space shifts when a third person moves in, even temporarily. Routines get disrupted. Rhythms get thrown off. And in this case, the disruption went well beyond minor inconvenience. Chloe has turned the shared living space into her personal bedroom. The couch, which is a living room couch in a home this man pays the majority of the rent for, is buried under her laundry, her blankets, her chargers, her shoes, the accumulated physical sprawl of someone who has quietly stopped treating themselves like a guest. The television is on at full volume, running reality TV at all hours. She is taking phone calls loudly and at length, her voice filling up every corner of the apartment with conversations that have nothing to do with anyone else there. The cats, his cats, are visibly stressed, retreating to corners or behaving out of character, because she keeps rearranging their things and disrupting the spatial patterns that made them feel safe. And this man, the person whose name is on the lease, has essentially been pushed out of every shared space in the apartment. He retreats to his bedroom just to decompress after work because the living room no longer feels like his. Oh, the headphones thing. I cannot move past the headphones thing without saying something. She asked him to use headphones while gaming in his own living room because the clicking was giving her a headache. Sit with that for a moment. A guest, a house guest who has overstayed by about 18 days, looked at the person whose home she is living in for free and asked him to change his behavior in his own space to accommodate her comfort. That is not a small moment of friction. That is a fundamental misread of the power dynamic in that apartment. And it reveals something important about how entitled the situation has become without anyone naming it out loud. Now here is the layer that makes this really tricky. Every time he tries to talk to Sarah about it, the conversation collapses before it even begins. She does not engage with his concerns and then disagree. She shuts it down immediately, reaching for the most emotionally loaded framing she can find. She calls him heartless. She says Chloe is fragile right now. She positions any attempt he makes to set a boundary or request a timeline as evidence that he does not care about her friends, that he lacks compassion, that he is choosing his comfort over someone else's crisis. So he is not just dealing with a difficult living situation. He is dealing with a girlfriend who has decided that the very act of raising his concerns makes him the villain. He literally came to the internet trying to figure out how to have this conversation without being labeled a bad person, which tells you everything about how these conversations have been going at home. He is walking on eggshells in a space he funds, terrified that saying the obvious will cost him more than staying silent already has. Let us talk about the fragile framing for a moment, because Sarah is leaning on it very hard and it is doing a lot of work in this situation. Chloe went through a breakup. That is painful, it is real, and she absolutely deserves support from the people who love her. But fragile does not mean without responsibility. Fragile does not mean entitled to indefinitely occupy someone else's home without a timeline. Fragile does not mean exempt from basic consideration for the people whose space you are living in, whose routines you are disrupting, whose peace you are consuming every single day. Using someone's emotional state as a blanket reason to never set any limits is not compassion. It is avoidance dressed up as kindness, and eventually it slides into manipulation, whether that manipulation is intentional or not. He pays 70% of the rent. That number matters. That is not a 50-50 household where two people have equal say in everything that happens within those walls. He is the primary financial contributor to this living space, and he is currently the person with the least say in how it is being used. His girlfriend gets a vote, obviously, because she lives there too and her relationship with Chloe is real and meaningful. But Chloe does not get a vote. Chloe is a guest. And guests, especially guests who are staying entirely on someone else's goodwill in someone else's home, do not get to set the terms of that household. There is also a relationship dynamic here that I think is worth naming, because it is easy to get lost in the logistics of the couch and the laundry and the headphones and miss the bigger picture underneath all of it. This man loves his girlfriend. He agreed to this arrangement because she asked him to and because he wanted to support something that mattered to her. He is not trying to be cruel to Chloe. He is not indifferent to what she is going through. He said yes out of genuine generosity, and he is now watching that generosity be turned against him every single time he tries to say that 3 weeks is long enough. Every time he tries to be honest, he is handed a label that makes him feel ashamed for having needs at all. The resentment he is feeling is not irrational. It is not pettiness. It is the entirely predictable result of being told, over and over again, that his comfort matters less than a houseguest's fragility. That kind of resentment, when it builds without being addressed or even acknowledged, does real damage to relationships. Not dramatic sudden damage but slow quiet damage, the kind that accumulates in small moments and silences until one day the warmth is just gone. And Sarah needs to understand that the threat to this relationship is not him asking for a deadline. The threat is the ongoing situation where he feels like a stranger in his own home and his girlfriend consistently sides with someone else over him. So what does he actually do? He needs to sit Sarah down, not to ask for permission, but to draw a clear line. Not hostile, not aggressive, but firm and direct. Something like, I want Chloe to have the support she needs, and I also need a specific move-out date. Not a rough time frame, not a we will see, a date. And if Sarah responds by calling him heartless, he needs to be ready to hold that line anyway, because being called heartless for having boundaries in your own home is not an argument. It is a deflection. It is also worth having a conversation about what resources Chloe actually has. 3 weeks is long enough to have looked at apartments, contacted a housing service, reached out to family, or made some kind of concrete plan. The question of where Chloe goes next should not be entirely invisible in these conversations. If Chloe has made no effort to figure out her next step, that is important information. And if Sarah has not encouraged her to do so, that is also important information. Here is my honest take, and I will not dance around it. Because this situation has been talked around enough already, and someone needs to say what is actually happening here. Sarah's loyalty to Chloe has crossed a line. It crossed the line around day 10 when she started treating her boyfriend's reasonable concerns as character flaws. A partner who consistently frames your comfort as cruelty is not advocating for their friend. They are dismissing you. And that is a problem that goes beyond the couch. He came here asking how to reclaim his space without being the villain. But here is the truth. He is not the villain in this story. He never was. He let someone into his home out of generosity, he set no original timeline because he trusted his girlfriend to be reasonable, and when he tried to course correct he was shut down and labeled heartless. The real question is not how to avoid being the villain. The real question is why his girlfriend keeps casting him as one for simply expecting basic fairness in his own home. If Chloe is still on that couch in another 3 weeks and Sarah is still calling him heartless for wanting his living room back, that is a relationship conversation, not a roommate conversation. Because at that point it is not about Chloe at all. It is about whether Sarah sees him as an equal partner whose needs matter, or as a resource to be managed while she prioritizes everyone else. And he deserves to know the answer to that question before the resentment does any more damage. Drop a comment telling me which story hit harder, I genuinely want to know. And if you made it this far, a like and subscribe would mean a lot.